It's about time. Now, shh. Psst, shh. Psst. What? What are we doing today? The platoon exercise. Platoon exercise? I thought it was company drill. It's company drill in the platoon exercise. Now shut up. If we were doing platoon exercise, wouldn't that make it platoon drill? Huh? How could they be the same then? I mean, it's a company, it's a platoon. How does that work? Because, now try and wrap your pea brain around it. The company is the platoon. Now will you shut up?
The battlefield of the Napoleonic era was horribly chaotic. The sheer din of men, horses, the crash of musketry, the thunder of the artillery. Not to mention the smoke, causing a literal fog of war, the weather, and the conditions. These would all combine to add to the considerable distraction placed upon the infantryman. He had but one job to do. That was to seize or hold ground. Often, this involved closing with his enemy. The weapon he would use in order to achieve this was the flintlock smoothbore musket, in British service colloquially known as the Brown Bess. In order to use this weapon effectively, while in extreme peril and under incomprehensible distraction, the infantryman had to learn and practice its method of use. This would ensure that he'd be able to deliver its fire effectively under these tumultuous conditions.
By the beginning of the 19th century, European warfare had seen great change. The massed conscript armies of France had achieved great success, and the Napoleonic age ushered in an era of operational and tactical maneuver that had changed the somewhat more formal method practiced in the 18th century. Some aspects had not, of course. Chief amongst these was the weaponry carried by the infantry. The flintlock smoothbore musket, which had achieved maturity by the beginning of the 18th century, had, by the turn of the 19th century, not materially changed in 100 years. This was the case for the British and Empire armies, as it was for the others. The use of the musket had caused certain aspects of warfare to remain unchanged. Infantry firepower was no exception. The range and intensity of a firefight had been consistent for a century, and would remain so for at least another 50 years. Governed by the relatively slow rate of fire of 3 rounds a minute by an individual and a maximum effective range of 100 yards or so. This required men to be massed together and at close range if their fire was to have the desired effect. In order to control firing and ensure that the men could be relied on to perform under the extreme duress of the cacophony and peril of battle, the use of the musket was taught and practiced in a series of drills known as the platoon exercise. British and Empire musketry of the Napoleonic age is a complex subject and can be broken down into the following categories. The platoon exercise, which was the drill taught to and used by the individual. Firings in close order, and variations thereof used by light infantry. As mentioned in this video, we'll deal with the platoon exercise. The reference used in this video is entitled The Rules and Regulations for the Manual and Platoon Exercises, Formations, Field Exercise, and Movements for the Use of Non-Commissioned Officers, dating from 1807. This was a somewhat abridged, though official manual, for the use of NCOs in particular, and contained the relevant information for drill instruction, musketry, and basic maneuver. This document used as its source the earlier 1792 Rules and Regulations, which was based heavily on the works of Dundas, to which numerous amendments and additions were made throughout the era, and the 1804 Manual and Platoon Exercises. Although this video will focus on the individual drills, it might be beneficial to provide some background to the system of musketry used in the Napoleonic age. Before we carry on, it's important to realize that the textbook formation used by the British Army in this era was the 3-rank line: front, center, and rear. Thus, all the manuals are written with this in mind. The reality of the way the army fought in the 1800s was quite different. Recent experience during the late 1700s, and perhaps even somewhat of a corporate memory stretching back to the American Revolution, saw the Army adopt a two-rank line. It was found that the third or rear rank made the effective delivery of fire awkward, and its use in close quarters was somewhat marginal. Despite the overwhelming use of the two-rank line, the drill books of the era never mentioned it. The name of the exercise comes from the use of the term platoon, which was, at its outset, specifically a fire unit within the battalion line of battle, and distinct from the companies, which were administrative units. Hence, the exercise, or series of drills needed to deliver their fire effectively, became known as the platoon exercise. By the latter part of the 18th century and on into the Napoleonic era, the complex and confusing platoon system as used in the 1700s was simplified. Here, the companies became the platoons. But fire was not necessarily delivered only at the platoon level. The commander of a battalion had a number of options he could exercise, depending on the situation. But this is the subject for the video next in the series. For now, we'll focus on the drills that laid the foundation for effective musketry. Instruction in the platoon exercise was part of the basic set of drills learned by any recruit. The manual exercise, or the drills associated with holding and carrying the firelock, as well as basic company drill. Instruction was received on the parade square or suitable open area, and was generally the preserve of the NCOs of the depot or battalion. Of importance was the fact that, whilst underarms, the men carried their brown Bess at the half-cock position, and the hammer, more commonly known today as the frizzen, closed. The platoon exercise, like all things military, was taught by numbers. There were 10 steps, each with an associated command, and these were broken, when required, into further steps for simplification and understanding. Although the phrase by numbers specifically isn't mentioned in the text, there is certainly the indication to use them, which is supported in other secondary documents. As already noted, the drill began as though the musket was loaded, and the first movement of the exercise was the make ready.
Make ready!
On the command, the firelock was brought up in front of the body, held vertically by the left hand just in front of the lock. As the position was gained, the weapon was brought to the full cock with the thumb of the right hand, keeping the fingers open beside the lock plate. This was known as the recover. The present. This word of command was to be abbreviated into a single syllable.
Present!
On the command present, the firelock was lowered to the firing position by sliding the left hand towards the swell of the stock, and the right hand assumed a grip at the small, placing the finger on the trigger. It was intended for the right eye to look along the barrel, from the breech nail to the sight or bayonet lug. Simultaneously, the right foot was drawn back 6 inches from the left. This was to accommodate for the recoil of the piece.
Fire!
On the command, the trigger was pulled firmly, in period terminology, and once discharged, the position of the present was maintained. Load, in 2 parts.
Load! 2.
Note that the butt should be held somewhat higher, as in this example. In the first part, the firelock was brought to what was known as the priming position, at the right side. Here, the muzzle was angled up at eye height, and the lock opposite the right breast. Simultaneous to this, the spur of the cock was gripped with the first finger and thumb. A third motion was performed at the same time. This was to draw the right foot up and place it next to the inside of the right heel. This maintained the body at a slight angle to the right, as had been the case while firing. In the second part, the lock was brought to the half-cock. Handle cartridge in 2 parts.
Handle cartridge! 2.
In the first part, the right hand was moved directly to the pouch, withdrawing a cartridge. In the second part, the cartridge was brought to the mouth and the powder end of the cartridge bitten off in the teeth. Prime in 3 parts.
Prime!
the first part, the cartridge was lowered to the pan, and a small amount of powder shaken into it. In the second part, the steel, or hammer, today commonly known as the frizzen, was closed with the remaining 3 fingers of the right hand. In the third part, the right hand quit the steel and gripped the small of the butt with the same remaining 3 fingers. The cast about, in 3 parts. This command was abbreviated to the word bout.
Bout! 2, 3.
In the first part, the firelock was turned around by forcing down on the butt and swinging it around to the left side. Simultaneous to this, the right hand quit the small of the butt and caught the barrel near the muzzle next to the left breast. At the same time, the butt was brought to a position adjacent the left heel, 2 inches off the ground. In the second part, the butt was gently lowered to the ground. The powder was then poured into the barrel, and the ball, with the paper intact, was placed in the muzzle, paper first. In the third part, the right hand gripped the top of the ramrod with the thumb and forefinger. Draw ramrods in 2 parts.
Draw ramrod. 2.
In the first part, the ramrod was drawn out of the pipes, halfway where it was caught with a backhanded grip at the midpoint. In the second part, it was fully removed, inverted, then the head placed 1 inch into the barrel. Ramdown Cartridge in 4 parts.
Ramdown Cartridge. 2, 3, 4.
In the first part, the cartridge was pushed down half the length of the ramrod. In the second, the hand was moved to the tip of the ramrod. While in the third part, the cartridge was pushed the rest of the way to the breech. And in the fourth part, the cartridge was fully seated with 2 taps of the ramrod. Return ramrods in 2 parts.
Return ramrod. 2.
In the first part, the ramrod was thrown up and caught with a backhanded grip at its midpoint. In the second part, it was withdrawn completely, inverted, then placed in the ramrod pipes, pushed fully home. As the ramrod was seated, the man was to face his proper front, bringing his right foot to the position of attention and shoulders square to the front. Simultaneously, he lifted the firelock 2 inches off the ground. Shoulder arms.
Shoulder arms.
On the command, the muzzle was struck with the right hand to ensure the ramrod and bayonet, if fixed, were seated correctly. Then, immediately subsequent, the piece was thrown up and caught at the position of shoulder arms, with the right hand being cut away immediately. With the firelock back at the shoulder, the evolution was complete, and another volley could be fired, with the simple words of command, "Make ready, present," and fire.
Fire. Load. 2. Handle cartridge. 2. Prime. 2. 3. Bout. 2. 3. Draw ramrod. 2. Ramdown cartridge. 2, 3, 4. Return ramrod. 2. Shoulder arm.
As noted earlier, the platoon exercise was curiously taught and delivered as though with a loaded musket. There was, however, subsequent direction given to the priming and loading of the firelock from an unloaded state. Here, and why it wasn't taught this way earlier in the training I do not know, a series of preliminary movements were prescribed.
Prime and load!
In the first part, the firelock was brought to the priming position, as formerly taught, with the appropriate hold of the musket and foot placement. The thumb of the right hand was placed against the steel or hammer.
2.
In the second part, the pan was opened with the thumb. And in the third,
3.
the cartridge was retrieved from the pouch. Subsequent movements were as already directed, and to be completed with all dispatch, and would eventually return the man to either the shoulder or the recover, depending on the evolution next required. So, we've examined the platoon exercise as taught to recruits, as well as the actions on the command prime and load. Of course, the pedantic way these motions were carried out by numbers was certainly not the way they were performed in action. Although the mechanics of the evolutions remained the same, the commands were greatly simplified. Prime and load, make ready, or simply ready, present, and fire. Even these could be abbreviated yet if in action for any extended period of time. Simply present and fire, with the men automatically priming and loading and coming to the recover, ready to deliver another volley. Of course, the training would have its effect. The minutiae of the exercise would be conducted appropriately, even at times of high stress, due to the way it was taught and practiced. Today, the term review has the connotation of formal parades and inspections by senior ranks or other dignitaries. During the Napoleonic Era, and indeed the Victorian Era, a review was a much more practical assessment of a given battalion or larger organization. While the obligatory inspections and remarks would undoubtedly have been given, a review would also contain a series of maneuvers and techniques that would be demonstrated, and although the platoon exercise was not automatically part of a review, it was still an option that could be demanded of a given unit by the inspecting officer. Here, the battalion would be taken through the exercise by command, not necessarily by numbers, and their efficiency gauged. Of course, efficiency at drill is one thing. Efficiency on the battlefield would be quite another. Pedantic repetition of movements certainly could be looked on as a foundation or baseline by which to measure a unit's skill at delivering their fire. And indeed, the nuances of battlefield musketry could only be judged well on the battlefield, or perhaps by some complex system of collective target practice, both essentially impossible to replicate outside of those actual circumstances. Mention of battlefield musketry does raise one aspect worth mentioning: rate of fire. Much is made of the musketry skills of the British soldier in the era. Indeed, there is a common thread in many relevant battlefield anecdotes that support this. This can be attributed to a number of things: training, shooting, and the application of musketry in action. While we will delve deeper into the practical applications later in the series, the training, as shown here, and the use of practice ammunition, both blank and live, gave a degree of advantage to the British soldier. Although not referenced at all in the manual, a rate of fire of 3 rounds per minute is generally understood to have been within the abilities of most units. Practice at drill would get you so far, and practice with live ammunition would take you farther. I can attest that the use of live ammunition is different in terms of time it takes to complete the evolutions from blank ammunition, which is again, of course, different from dry training. As will be most obvious here, I've not done the requisite practice to achieve the standard of 3 rounds a minute. In reviewing the footage, I can see where economies could be taken and small tweaks made. While observing correct drills and positions as well as being encumbered by equipment adds somewhat to the time taken, I should, with more practice, be able to achieve a 3 round a minute standard. Ahem. Dull flints notwithstanding. For practice purposes, line infantry was issued 30 rounds per man, with more for the light infantry and the rifles. Perhaps the best indication of rate of fire expectations in the infantry can be gained from a work by Lieutenant John Russell of the 96th, who compiled a selection of experimental evolutions designed to ascertain the relationship between ground, distance, marching pace, and rates of fire of the infantry and artillery. As well, these details put in the context of facing cavalry. These bear specific note, as they were official undertakings, and the results can generally be applied to the infantry as a whole. A few bear specific mention. When set against an infantry advance and charge of some 250 yards, lasting 90 seconds, 5 rounds were fired. In another similar scheme, 7 rounds were fired in 145 seconds. There were other experiments, including a time trial of 36 rounds being done in 13 minutes, exclusive of some pouch issues, and an interesting comparison, firing in marching order versus a lightly equipped man, the latter bettering the former by 2 rounds in the same time frame, 37 to 35. A key takeaway in these experiments was the universal practice of beginning all evolutions loaded, with the time starting at the first discharge, as would typically be the case in action. Now, as interesting as these experiments may be, and also how easy to digest the concept of rounds per minute is, rate of fire is perhaps the greatest red herring there is in relation to battlefield musketry. The instances of firepower duels were actually horribly infrequent and nearly exclusively resulted not in a decisive victory, either locally or in the battle as a whole, but rather in an exhaustive playout of the endurance of the engaged armies, with one side essentially giving up and melting away after achieving nothing but enormous ammunition expenditure and heavy casualties, all the while not taking the ground or defeating their enemy. Far and away, it was the simple, short engagement of 1 or 2 volleys, delivered in any number of ways, but at close range, followed by an immediate charge. The confusion caused by this close-range delivery of fire serving only as a preparatory to the decisive stroke of an instantaneous assault with the bayonet. This was played out on dozens of battlefields, and was perhaps, more than any prowess that the British infantry might have enjoyed as far as rate of fire is concerned, the true epitaph to the effectiveness of British arms on the Napoleonic battlefield. Extended musketry battles did happen, perhaps the most famous of which is the Battle of Albufera. Sir John Fortescue wrote, "A duel so stern and resolute that it had few parallels in the annals of war. The survivors who took part in it on the British side seemed to have passed through it as if in a dream, conscious of nothing but of dense smoke, constant closing towards the center, a slight tendency to advance, and an invincible resolution not to retire. The men stood like rocks, loading and firing into the mass in front of them, though frightfully punished not so much by the French bullets as by grape shot from the French cannon at very close range. The line dwindled and dwindled continually, and the intervals between battalions grew wide as the men, who were still on their legs, edged in closer and closer to their colours. But not one dreamed for a moment of anything but standing and fighting to the last. The fiercest of the stress fell upon Haughton's brigade, wherein it seems that every mounted officer fell. Captains, lieutenants, ensigns, sergeants, and rank and file all equally fell fast. Nearly 4/5 of Haughton's brigade were down, and its front had shrunk to the level of that of the French. But still it remained unbeaten, advanced to within 20 yards of the enemy, and fired unceasingly. By way of a discussion of minutiae, a consideration of some of the evolutions shown here might be appropriate. As it pertains to foot placement, the manual is quite clear in its description of the foot position while in the priming position. Here it states that the right foot is brought up to the inside of the left heel. Now, on the surface, this does appear somewhat awkward, but after repeated evolutions becomes quite natural. Now, I understand that this may be at odds with common practices and perceptions elsewhere, where the right foot is brought into a position behind the left heel. This was certainly the case after the Napoleonic Wars, as is demonstrated in the 1823 manual. But the 1807 work and various period images are quite clear as to this perhaps unfamiliar foot placement. A second point is the use of the ammunition. You will have noticed the way that the cartridge was placed in the barrel. In doing so, the empty part of the paper cartridge was placed in the barrel first, with the bullet still inside the paper. This helped take up the windage in the barrel, and when rammed down on top of the powder, it crumpled, forming a rudimentary sabot. This helped to hold the bullet in position, as well as to reduce the escape of gases during firing, thus making for a steadier journey of the bullet down the barrel. This was the way the drill was performed, and there is exceptionally little or no evidence to suggest that it was done any other way. One popular conception, thanks to a certain fictional character, is that the bullet was bitten off at the top of the cartridge and subsequently spat into the barrel, with either ramming or simply rapping the butt on the ground.
Bite, pour, spit, tap, in.
For those interested in further exploration of this myth, the YouTube channel C.D. Sadler has made a fine effort examining the realities of this oft-quoted but quite ahistorical technique. So that completes the examination of the Platoon Exercise of 1807. It was this training that laid the foundation for the effective delivery of musketry on the battlefield. Drills learned and practiced ad infinitum would see automatic responses to commands entrenched in muscle memory, so that when facing extreme danger, in very close proximity to the enemy, the infantryman could be relied on to load and fire his piece. In the next video of the series, we'll examine the way the musketry was delivered on the battlefield, while in close order, known as the firings, and look at the reality of the infantry battle of the late Napoleonic era. I'd like to thank friend of the channel, Ewan, for his continued assistance through pertinent references, pointed discussion, as well as his personal experience in delivering the history through his hobby and also professional avenues. Your help in sifting through these often vague works has been most helpful. And thank you to Jordan Kipp and the Historical Aviation Film Unit, now known as the Historical Machines TV channel on YouTube, for the kind provision of some footage used in this video. If you'd like to support the channel, please stop by our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. And for more information on projects and updates between videos, follow us on our Facebook page.